thank you everybody for joining us for this webinar. I know you all have lots of choices on where and how you learn, and we've tried to be very thoughtful as Marion Economic Development Corporation is concerned to not just throw a bunch of webinars out there, but to really throw the ones out there that really catch our attention the most. And this topic today on really thinking through and developing your return to work plan and strategy is one that we feel encompasses perhaps the most important questions that now you as business owners and leaders of various organizations are navigating. So we are going to record this session. So if you have any members of your team who are not able to join us today, and afterwards you feel like we talked about some things you want to share, we will post this to our website, to our COVID-19 resource page. We've been trying to put all of the best video resources that we've identified on that page, so watch for that in the next couple of days. We are going to keep everyone muted as we get going here today, so if you're looking at your own controls, we're trying to not dictate how this goes. We're trying to give you all some flexibility to participate, so please try and keep your lines muted. We are not using the webinar platform where it's designed to be just one way. We're keeping it more of a meeting platform. So we like the ability to see who's on here and to talk with the people who's on here. So we're going to try to do it that way. We have the potential for this to be a pretty large group, but I think a couple months in, we've all developed some pretty good Zoom etiquette. We have a series of predetermined questions that Mark and I have thought through that we're going to work through. We want this to be interactive. I think in the way that we kind of sold this webinar to you all, we said we're going to do some live polling. So this is kind of a new thing for us. We're going to give that a shot in just a couple of minutes. So know that we're going to throw some questions out there and ask for your response as we all kind of learn together from each other. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll start by introducing Mark. Mark Hudson is an attorney and senior vice president at Shuttleworth Ingersoll PLC here in the Cedar Rapids Metro. Mark's work focuses on labor and employment compliance and counseling. This includes personnel policies, workplace investigations, affirmative action, program compliance, wage and hour advice, and general employment counseling. He also specializes in labor and employment litigation, workplace training, privacy and data, security compliance and litigation, and also fair housing litigation and compliance. I think probably all of you touch one of those topics in some way, which is why we thought Mark would be a good resource to put in front of us here to get things underway. So Mark, thank you for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your time and your expertise and perspective on a multitude of topics here today.
Well, I appreciate that, Nick. I appreciate Medco inviting me to do this, and for everybody joining on. And I look forward to a good discussion. And hopefully, it is. My goal is to be interactive and engaging, so we can have conversations that really affect what everybody on the call is, thinks about when they go to sleep and they're tired and they're stressed out about something, that we can help do that.
Yeah. So let's start by just kind of testing some of this interactivity. One thing that I first wanted to share as we kind of tee up the first question is our organization has regularly been doing a series of just outreach to our business partners. And this past week, we did a survey just asking our companies if you've developed any plans to return remote workers back to your offices. And this is going to lead into a poll that we're going to launch in a second. So what we're hearing is 49% of respondents said yes, 25% of respondents said no, and then the balance, 26% of respondents said we're kind of in the process of putting a plan in place to return some of our remote workers back. So let's give this a try. We're going to launch that question to you all regarding what are your thoughts on returning employees back to work. Mark, we know over the past couple of weeks, state restrictions, even effective as soon as today on a variety of business types, have been lifted or eased. Individuals are thinking about traveling for business again. Perhaps companies like this question that we're asking right now, who sent office staff home, are thinking about bringing some of those folks back. And we use this phrase and this idea of returning to normal as we return to work. Um, it's on the minds of employers and employees. Um, Mark, is that phrase or that thought, returning to normal, even appropriate in the topics that we're really navigating and thinking about right now?
Well, I'll be blunt, and I'm pretty opinionated on this topic, just so you guys, everybody knows this. This is Mark Hudson on this topic, but it's partly because I'm seeing is I don't think it'll ever go back to normal, because I also think normal is 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 a structured idea of how we operate, and so normal should always change anyway. I mean, nobody does their business and doesn't adapt to different markets or different issues, whether it be what clients want or customers want, or what employees need or what employees aren't happy. We always have to adapt, and it's never just this is the way we're going to do it. We're done. So
Mhm.
the idea of normal, if you're thinking you're going back to what it was, I will just tell you after working, because all I've been doing in the last basically 9-10 weeks is dealing with COVID related issues with employees and employers trying to figure out what to do. And I will tell you, and we've worked with some other folks, some healthcare professionals, and this has been a traumatic experience. No matter what status, whether that people were continuing to work throughout this whole time, or whether they were isolated at home. This is an experience that will affect our mental state. I akin it to the idea of my great grandma used to wash the Ziploc bags because she went through the Great Depression. So I used to like she'd have a Ziploc bag. She'd actually wash it out and then hang it out there to dry and then reuse it. Now I'll just tell you, now we have Ziploc bags of all different sizes and they're quite inexpensive most of the time, except for the big ones. Those gallon bags are pretty expensive.
Mhm.
I still have my grandma's principles there. But the idea is that experience changed the way people thought. And so if we think we're going to go from 9 weeks ago or 10 weeks ago, where it seems like we weren't affected or it was pretty normal, to we're going to start to go back to work now, and it's going to be just like we stopped, the pause between, like, can you give a handshake? Is it okay to stand within 6 feet of somebody? Um, People are it's going to affect how people, there are some people that are going to be brazen and they're going to be like, yay, we're going to start giving hugs, high fives, and then there are going to be a lot of people that are like, back away from you. And so I think we're going to have to realize that there is a new normal. There also, I think there's an issue of expectations. uh, for example, there's always been risk in working. I mean, I drive to work in a car. There is a chance that I get into a car accident and die, knock on wood. Uh, but there's a reality, there's a risk there. We're going to have employees coming back now saying, what are you doing for me? How are you making this a safe workplace? And the answer is we have to figure out a way to say we're doing everything we can that's appropriate, um, and that we think this is what we're doing, and that should help satisfy them. The dilemma is not everybody's on the same understanding of what's regular or what's satisfying to them.
Mhm.
And so one of the things I think that when I see this plan, I see the people that you talked about, 49% or so, we were talking about making a plan. There's a physical idea of bringing people back, and then there's the behavioral side. How do you have meetings anymore? Will people feel uncomfortable if somebody is, a space invader? I think they use that term sometimes in elementary school. Space invaders, that they're interrupting their space. Well, we all have those at the workplace. And do they go back to that? And then what happens? And how do you react without, because there's going to be a side where some people are like, well, step away. Why are you trying to hurt me? Why are you trying to put me at risk? And then that person, I'm not going to try to do that. And so again, we're going to have these fights. What I would say, just these little spats, because I think we need to start. And for as employers, we can't just pretend everybody's going to come to work and there's always drama at work. It's one of the reasons I like my job, because it's always drama. It's what my job would be boring otherwise. At the same time, we have to plan to try to reduce that drama.
Mark, I'm sure I'm sharing these poll results if you're able to see
Yep,
those right
I
now.
am.
So it's pretty pretty evenly split amongst the
Hmm.
participants here. The most prevailing response, only by a couple, is that they're using the rotating schedule thing.
Sure.
Is that a common thing that
Yes.
you're seeing amongst your clients?
Yeah, I mean, here's the idea: is the so I'll start off with this though. So I want to importantly, simply because there is this like you're able to open up, doesn't necessarily mean that's the appropriate thing for your business. That is a governmental relaxation of the rules, how she's established the rules. It doesn't necessarily mean everybody needs to run to it. And actually, if we go back to the name of this seminar or this a webinar or this discussion, it started off with: is it legal? Is it safe? Is it responsible? And so those three things should be the lenses you look at everything. So what we look at is, look, is it legal? So once the closure orders are released or are relaxed, where it's legal, we can go back. Okay, that's one part. Second part, is it safe? Does it make sense? Can I, for example, make sure that that we can do social distancing? And actually, I'll change that word because I actually think I've heard it said another. It's spatial distancing. It's not social distancing; it's spatial distancing. It is about physical closeness, not about how social or interactive you are with people. So one of the things I think we use this term too much is social distancing. It's actually spatial distancing. Um, and then third, is it responsible? Meaning, is it really necessary? So, for example, if people are working at home at doing well, should they stay there? We don't know the answer. And the thing is, science right now is, because this is so new, we're learning every single day. The question is, how much risk do you want to take? So on the staggering schedule, the reason why that's a really creative and interesting option is what that does is it doesn't make, if you have 100 employees, rather than having 100 employees there for 8 hours a day, you have 50 employees there for 4 hours, maybe 100 for 2 hours, and then so you're staggering the numbers so that you don't do that. Now manufacturing has been doing this and being pretty creative with zones. They'll also do zones, so they'll say you work in zone 1, you stay in zone 1. And part of the other issue on staggering, it's actually twofold. First of all, it reduces the risk of people being exposed to COVID. Secondly, if you have a positive test, if somebody gets it, we're going to have to take action, and then you're going to have to determine, through this contact tracing, the surveillance kind of tracing aspect, who else has been exposed, and are we going to send them home for 14 days as well? And so when you have everybody there, and if they're not able to spatial distance, then your business could be then shut down because let's say all of your welders are within 6 feet of each other. One of your welders gets COVID, and so everybody's been exposed to COVID in your welding department. All of your welders go home. Now, if you've staggered it, for example, you might be able to say there's 4 welders on for the first shift, 4 welders on for the second shift. You're not necessarily shut down then when first shift has an exposure issue. So
Mhm.
part of it is to think in those terms. I think the school districts are thinking about this too. It's one of the reasons why you see the school districts have to come up with 3 plans. The first plan being they're going to be all the students are present. The second plan is everybody's remote, and then third plan is that hybrid. Is how can you think about a high school and how many students there are. Say it's 1,500 or 1,000 to 1,500 in a high school. You have spatial distance issues everywhere there. So if you can reduce the number of students on any given day, it helps prevent that, that thing. And then one thing I'll add on the stagger thing, make sure when you're doing it staggered is that you're not just rotating people. The goal of staggered is to eliminate the number of people have interaction with, because it allows you not to have as much exposure. But if you all of a sudden filter people or shift groups all the times, then you're basically doing the same thing. It's just not as much time together. So that's an important part of that part.
I may have mentioned travel a couple of minutes ago, and I know that we've had a couple of companies reach out directly to us as they think through this whole topic of, gee, should I let employees travel? We have been holding off on travel, and this isn't even necessarily sales related, but there could be some critical functions. Like we have a manufacturing company here in town that, legitimately needs to have folks travel to install equipment that they've sold, or travel to
Hmm.
service equipment that they have sold, and that might be in the United States. It might be globally. Um, but the other thing that's difficult is even keeping track of, boy, was that 14-day thing a recommendation? Was that a restriction? Is that a restriction in Iowa? In the state we're traveling to, in the country we're traveling to? It can be a very complicated topic to address. So let me launch just quick another poll here briefly about asking folks how your company is handling corporate travel. Um, think about that. But Mark, this is a tricky subject, because even guidelines and recommendations are traveling, and companies need to weigh their own corporate policy against these guidelines and restrictions, and there's almost a lot of research you have to do depending on where you're going.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, so first of all, I start off with any analysis of this is, um, again, yeah, I go back to those three questions. Is it legal, safe, and is it responsible? Um, Here's the issue. This might be one of the things where, again, what normal is might change. And the question is, do I need to go? Do I need to go there? Do I need to do it now also? So there's two parts of that. One is, so for example, you mentioned installing. If we're the ones installing, that means likely you're going to have to go. That's one issue. If it's a sales call, of course we want to meet in person. Of course we want to do this. However, one of the things that we've started to learn, because of this, is of the usage of technology. And when you think about it, on a sales call, other than maybe other if it's unless it's a physical product that they want to put their hands on, or you want to take them out to lunch, or to go to their site and got to get specs and things of that nature. The reality is, if you really break it down, there's a lot of things in fact, I would even challenge that most, if not all, of the things that you do on a sales call can be done through video, through Zoom, or what other program you're using, and you can still be effective. And one of the things that it helps then is it also helps that that you're conscientious, because don't forget there's two parts to the sales thing. It's the employee that has to go, and the client. So one of the things that people are going to be seeing is that, look, we care about our employees. So, so for example, I just saw the poll, results, and that 63% are not allowing travel. At some point in time, people are going to have to travel. I mean, the reality is people are going to. The question is, and it's similar to the same kind of thing, is looking at phased return. What are the necessities? What are the needs? So how can we do it safe? So for example, if I need to travel to Des Moines and I go in my car, I go to one site, I know what they're doing. We meet in one conference room. I'm wearing a mask. We social distance. Is there less of a concern? Yes, there's less of a concern there, versus I have to travel to, um, let's say, Georgia, and I go, going to Georgia through, and through, as we're in Cedar Rapids, you can't it's hard to get a straight flight to Atlanta. So do you go through Charlotte? Do you go through Chicago? What do you allow? Charlotte and Chicago are some of the largest international airports there are. So when you put somebody through that, they're going to have exposure that way. And the question is, does that person feel safe about going? Is it a necessity? And are there alternatives? So let's get creative with alternatives, whether it means we invest in getting more demos, or maybe we give audio, virtual, we work on some virtual videos that will show the product and usage, and we can kind of step through them. It makes us get better at what we're doing, versus, hey, I'm your buddy, let's have a beer. I'm trying to sell you. I get that part, but really what it helps you do is make your product shine. It doesn't mean you have to eliminate it. And the other thing you have to think about, to me, is what happens when they come back. If I go to Atlanta, and I'm a salesperson, does that mean they're out for 14 days? Now, I'll just tell you, the CDC, it is important. There are specific guidance on what is absolutely recommended, and they have certain countries. I will just tell you right now, there are not many non-hotspots in the United States. I mean, if you're going to any of the coasts, or what I would call the U shape, if you kind of look at the location, if you look at kind of the coast, southern, northern, and Midwest is decent, but there are some hot spots. Anytime you travel those hot spots, it's pretty much similar to traveling international. It's not like traveling to Brazil or Italy or anything like that, or Iran or China. But there's some specific ones. But like, for example, I think we talked about this earlier, South Korea has a real fascinating process that to go to South Korea to do business right now, you have to go 14 days before quarantine. You actually have to quarantine there for 14 days. Then you might have your business meeting, and then you travel back in quarantine for another 14 days. So if you're going to make a business trip to South Korea, it's going to take you 29 days for one meeting. And so my thought process is that really necessary? I mean, unless we have to sit there and look at each other in the eyes and do those and actually see each other, is that really the necessary thing? Does it really help, put the employee at risk? Is it necessary? Now, it might be. It depends. And that's why these things are not. One of the things I want to make clear on all these things is there's not one answer. And that's why I always start with those three questions. If you start with those three questions and we go through that, and don't forget to think about safety from different perspectives. Some clients might be like, we don't want you here. And frankly, that makes it easier. When your clients or customers say, oh, you know what, we don't want you to come. Perfect. Then we don't have to make the hard call. The ones that are the hard calls are when the client says, I want you to come here. And then we have to and the problem is, if you're a salesperson based on commissions, this is the exact opposite of what you're wanting to make good decisions, is that you are financially motivated to put yourself at risk because it has to be done. It's the same thing when we send people home with fevers. One of the things, the same kind of issue. We have to stop and think about, and this is one of your return to work, it's the new normal. And I hate the term new normal because it implies there's always a normal, but the reality is what we're dealing with is we have to stop creating incentives that encourage people to ignore these things. And so I've actually had some clients, they decided to, it was one in Virginia. So rather than fly, they paid for the guy to drive. They thought one hotel room along the way was less risky, and they were willing to let the person take the time to drive versus flying. And again, that answer might be correct today for that thing, and then a month later, it might be different. So we kind of have to ponder. I mean, the reality is everybody's business that is being hurt, whether it's in any transportation issues right now, they're going to adapt and innovate. I mean, they have to survive. So part of it is to determine. That's part of why I think when you think of plans, that you should, again, if there's one thing that this pandemic has made crystal clear, is that we have to be flexible to adapt to the situation we're in. And one of the things that is unique to this pandemic is we're used to being flexible and adaptive, but we're used to being able to have at least some basis or information that makes us feel like we're making the right decisions. And so part of it is changing those ideas and actually engaging in conversations with our sales folks or whomever's traveling to understand that this might change next week. And it's okay, because we learn more every time. So for example, like right now with Governor relaxing different rules and kind of regulations, nothing has really changed. And in fact, if you look at our rates, we've had more testing and we're having more positive cases. We've had more death. It's not necessarily changing. It's just at this point in time, there's a balance there. There's a balance issue of people that want to get the economy back up and going, to people that want to say, let's not, let's be cautious. And the dilemma is, no matter what the government says, you as employers have your own responsibility to do that. Just because the governor says open doesn't mean you should. And it doesn't mean you can't, but it means that you need to be thoughtful about it. The worst case scenario is being reactionary to just get open because you think, oh, I guess I got to get open. We need to be thoughtful and intentional in how we're reopening.
Yeah. Mark, let me pivot from travel, and as people think about returning to work, and this is almost becoming a divisive thing. Just I walk out the door of my home, and this topic is relevant, and that is thoughts on the requirements of PPE by employers. for their employees. And let me also just say, before we get into this next one, if you guys have any questions, participants on this webinar, please use the chat feature to drop those questions in there, and we'll consider them that way. But let's talk about PPE, Mark, as companies are developing policies, and we'll throw another question out there as far as employers' thoughts on that. How do you think about this? Do I wear a mask? Do I require my employees to wear a mask? What are you seeing as regards of how companies are approaching that or should be thinking about that?
Well, I think it's been clear, and the CDC has been making it clear that we need to do that. It is important to take steps to protect the ability of employees to infect each other. This has become political, and I want to make sure it's clear here. Employers have always required employees to wear PPE. This is not new. It doesn't change because it's COVID-19. If you're a welder, you're required to wear certain personal protective equipment. PPE does not just mean the face mask. It's personal protective equipment. We have always, whether you have to wear steel-toe boots, whether you have to wear face guards, whether you have to wear goggles or glasses, whether you need to do a heat shield. I mean, there are thousands of things that employers require. And so what we have to do is to stop thinking about this in any outside aspect, that this has to do with what the workplace is. And the question is, if it will help and it will prevent exposure to COVID-19, should we be doing it? And the answer is yes. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. If I'm having to do that when I walk outside, I think it's yes. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean mandatory or not, because there are certain situations depending upon, but again, if we go through the process of, is it legal, is it safe, is it responsible, think about what it is. If I work in an office where everybody has an office and a door, and everybody's, there might be, let's say, everybody has an office, you can shut the door. Do I have to wear my mask while I sit at my desk while I'm in my office alone? And the answer is probably, it's not as necessary. Now, if I have a bunch of people coming into my office all day, might it still be a wise idea? Yeah, because as much as everybody wants to say they cover their cough or they cover their sneeze or they don't do anything, you're in your office by yourself. Even if you sneeze into your elbow, like the kids are taught now to sneeze into the elbow, it still goes downward onto my desk. Might be on a piece of paper. I move it around, and so if I'm having meetings like that, it might be worthwhile. Now, with that said, so I actually think everybody should be wearing face masks as appropriate, and it depends on where that might be, where the common areas. So, for example, in the hallways and things of that nature, if you have meetings, and then you can take them off when you're in your office, those kind of things. So, to me, it's a no-brainer to do it. Now, with that said, there are exceptions. If you are significantly asthmatic, or you have a health condition that by wearing a mask would cause problems, for example, you have respiratory issues or things of that nature, sinus problems or certain things like that, then there might be a reason why that person shouldn't do it as an accommodation. But by the way, that's the same issue any day of the week on anybody. If you're a nurse and you're working in a in a surgery, you still have to wear protective equipment. So part of it is, it's not just yes or no. The issue is we're trying to prevent exposure. So are there alternatives to it? Are there alternatives to a mask? Is it the type of mask that's the issue? Is the asthmatic issue because it's so tight around your face? So for example, like an N95, it's going to have those really the very elastic parts, and it will be very, very snug, versus a face covering that you can adapt how tight it is, but still cover the particulates that come out of your mouth. So there are alternatives to that. That part of the discussion is we can't get into this You can't force me to wear one. The answer is yes, you can. There's no other than if they have a medical condition. So the reality, and we do it every day. You can't wear. We do it with dress codes. Can I wear open-toed sandals? Of course not with socks, because that'd be a faux pas. But can you wear sandals at work? Well, some places say it's not safe. Well, guess what? They're telling you what to wear. Can I wear jeans with holes in them? No, because it might get caught in the machine. So no, you can't do that. Can I wear really short shorts? No, because you might, part of what we're trying to do is because, let's say they have chemicals they're working with, they don't want it to splash on the skin. So those are things that like we do all the time. This PPE on the face mask, there's really a couple issues. One, are we going to make it mandatory or not? Two, are we going to provide it or not? And if we do provide it, what level? And then the third issue is what happens when they can't do it. For example, a welder likely shouldn't wear a paper face mask or anything that could be flammable. That's why you wear the face shield. So some of the things and the reason why is that when you're a welder, you take off the face shield at certain times to inspect things, but you still have to be able to put it back on. If you're wearing that face mask and that shield, it becomes much more difficult. So part of it is you have to go through those processes to think about that. I will just tell you generally, I think it's fine to make it mandatory. I think it's fine to be voluntary. If depending upon what type of industry you work in is the answer is whether or not you want to pay for it as an employer or encourage them to make their own. The dilemma with making their own is you don't know the quality, you don't know what they're doing with it, you don't know if they've washed it, because you're going to want to have rules about, you need to wash if you have a cloth one, to wash it and whatnot.
Mark, there's a couple of questions that have been submitted.
Sure.
So take a look at those. But as we prepare to do that, I want to ask one more question, one more poll here today.
Sure.
And you talked about PPE and the fact that as an employer, yeah, I can require my employees to do that because I've always done that. This question perhaps goes one step further, and that's related to screening employees as they return, and perhaps something even more invasive as an employer. So as we have results come in from there. Are employers struggling with this particular topic of do I screen, do I not screen? Is that invading the privacy of my employee? Where are we at on that?
Well, the reality is everybody's starting to screen. I mean, in some way or the other. So there are different alternatives to this. One is to have people do it at home and then trust them. Two is to have it done at work. And then the question is, what are you screening? So, for example, there are multiple ways to screen. So one is temperature, taking temperatures and things of that nature. The next one is the screening questionnaires. So let's start with the easier one. Screening questionnaires are absolutely permitted. The EEOC has authorized it. The issue is, and I will tell you, most of the places I've seen have not had issues with employees disliking it. In fact, they've been okay with it, but it does require a lot of planning. And part of the planning is, well, what questions are we asking? So first of all, you can't ask everybody if they have diseases or if they have any conditions, medical conditions. You can ask if they have symptoms. So you can ask the CDC symptoms, coughing, respiratory issues, loss of taste, diarrhea, fever, things of that nature. And there's some other ones that are like ancillary ones, like chills and things like that. The problem I have sometimes is when I read the list of all the symptoms, it's like, what doesn't come into that area? Now, but here's the important part, and part of the thing I think of, it's interesting because people are saying the new normal or things of that. Again, I don't like that term, but the new normal. We've always told people, when you're sick, stay home. We've had rules like this forever. And in fact, the washing of the hands thing, we've had signs up in our bathrooms and everything about hand washing. No matter what kind of employer, you've always had them. You've had people doing that, telling them to wash their hands. But to me, the screening process and then again, this is phased. At the beginning, I think it's a good sign to show that you're taking it seriously, to encourage. And it's not about catching people. It's about saying it's okay to stay home if you have one of these symptoms. And it's okay. And the reason why is, before, and I'll tell you, I've done this myself personally. So I'll use myself when I'm a bad example. There have been times I've come into work sick. Why? Because I want to get my work done. I'm a lawyer. So if I don't work, I don't get as much money. Like, I have to work to get money. So I'll close my door, shut the door. So I'll tell you about maybe 8 months ago, our receptionist, who is very, very observant. She's very observant, and we love her for that. I go into my office, and then about 1 o'clock, I come out to try to go get lunch. She goes, "Are you feeling all right?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" "Yeah, fine." She's like, "You've been coughing all day." Now I'll just tell you, my office is like 5 or 6 offices back. So if you think about an office about 10 or 12 feet long, 5 or 6 offices back, and I had my door shut, and she still heard me. And so she could tell I was coughing. Now I was like, "Oh no, I'm fine." And I kept going throughout my day. Now here's the thing, I shouldn't have been there, because really all I'm doing is exposing people to illness, whether it's COVID-19, the flu, or whatever it is. The reality is I shouldn't be there. So why am I not? And the reason that I'm not there is because I feel like, and this is what employees feel, that I will be punished somehow for staying home. So part of what I also think screening is that not just to get the information from them, but to start to make it feel it is acceptable and it's okay to say, I have a symptom, I'm going to stay home. And not only that, we're going to be asking you those questions, so you're going to have to tell us that. And so to me, part of what we're trying to do is change that cultural idea that if you have that symptom, it's okay to stay home. And we're going to try to make sure that you're not punished for it, or we're going to compensate for that somehow. Because here's the issue. And it's not as much of an issue for me because I can work remotely. But if they can work remotely, what it's going to be is people are just going to say, "Well, why don't you work from home today? Because you're sick."
Yeah.
Perfectly fine. But for the people that can't, they're going to be saying, "Well, how do I make my rent payment? How do I make my mortgage payment? How do I make my school loan payment or my utility bill payment? Because I can't afford to be gone." And so what employers will have to start thinking of is, how do we address those kind of things with that?
Mark, you and I talked in preparation for this that a lot of this really has to do with, like, it's kind of managing the fear factor of our employees, and that perhaps transitions nicely into a question that was submitted here. How can an employer decide what is safe and responsible when the views of what that decision means are so different between employee and employer, right? We all know that whether it has to do with wearing masks in public, whether it has to do with topics of, you and I talked about this, youth sports, to play or not to play. In a business, there's going to be such varying opinions on whatever the topic might be. And as it relates to that fear factor and managing it, the question is should that employer be thinking about, is there risk of me having litigation brought against me for an unsafe work environment when a lot of this is coming down to personal opinions?
Well, here's the reality, and this is the lawyer side of me. One of the reasons we're thinking about all these processes is, remember, that's the second question: is it safe? How do we answer that question? And the objective way to do that is to show, not just to say, "Oh, we think it's safe." That doesn't do you as an opinion. What did you do differently? What did you do to help prevent this? So, for example, screening is a tool to show that you're trying to prevent exposure. Is it the end all be all? No, it is one of the tools that we use to make an argument. So this is my litigation side coming out. When I go to a jury and they say, "You made us come back to work and it was unsafe," what we're going to say is, "We did this, this, and this, and it was based on this, this, and this." And importantly, personal opinion is never there. So, for example, wearing a mask is a guidance that has been provided. Wearing face masks is a guidance that has been encouraged by the CDC. And there's also some guidance through OSHA about how to do it, or when to do it, and how to do the fits and things of that nature. And in fact, the CDC even has like specific guidelines on how you make a homemade mask, a face covering. So for example, if you have a policy then as the employer saying, "We're going to have masks and we're going to have face coverings, and here are the processes by which the acceptable masks are made," what we're doing is we're relying on the science or the CDC information to show that we're taking steps to make it safe and that are reasonable. So for example, why didn't you do this or that? And so the question is, so screening, EEOC has authorized it. Now the question is, do you want to screen this? So one of the questions I actually didn't think is, do you screen customers? And the answer is yes, you can. You can screen vendors. Anybody coming on your property, you can screen. Now you have to think of processes, because one of the things is this could be confidential medical information. So you have to make sure you're protecting it and keeping it confidential, and that your process is not just that everybody's, signs in on a book and says, yes, I have a cough, or this is my thing, and everybody can read it and see it. There's problems there. So you have to do it in the right manner. But one of the ways we're going to be able to answer the question on litigation and liability risk is, what did you do? And the answer should not and cannot just be, we opened up. So for example, did we close down break rooms? Yes, we closed down break rooms. We instituted staggered shifts, so we don't have as many people. Again, each of these things is evidence that we're taking and we're changing the way it's done to help provide a safe work environment. Now, the dilemma is, and this is where the frustration is when is enough enough? And that's the stressful thing right now, is because OSHA doesn't know that answer. Nobody does. We're going to know that answer in 18 months, hopefully, what that will be. But as of right now, here are the things. It is clearly screening questionnaires. So if people have traveled in certain places, if we've, and by the way, not just random, like I could say, you went to Clear Lake, okay, you're out. No, I got to figure out, why am I choosing that in travel? Is it on the CDC list as a level 3 risk? If it's on the CDC list as a level 3 risk, clearly that's okay. For example, the governor in Iowa has multiple times said traveling outside of Iowa. Well, that, by the way, is not a rule. It's nowhere. It's just for encouragement. So, but as an employer, we can decide that because everything, Iowa has less cases than Illinois or things of that nature, it's okay. But if somebody went to Wyoming right now, it's probably safer than here. They drive through South Dakota. There's only a little part of South Dakota that has a big outbreak. If you're out in the Badlands, it's probably okay. So part of it is we have to be flexible enough to understand where are the lines here. If they went up to Fargo, North Dakota to see their family, probably not something they need to, they drove up there, probably not going to be as big of an issue. Now, if we still have to ask the question, did you come in contact with someone that was exposed and things of that nature? But those are the things that help you, because again, there's a two-prong approach to this. One is I want to be able to, my litigation side, prove that we took reasonable steps. And what we're doing is we're developing that on the fly now. And then two, I want to help convince employees that we're taking steps to make them safe. In fact, most of the places that have done temperature readings, the employees have welcomed it and they've been okay with it. And the reason is that they feel like you're doing something to make sure that they don't get sick. If they have to come in or you're making them come in, that they're feeling like you're taking that into consideration. Because, for example, I can work at my home till forever. I mean, is it as productive? No, I would say no. I have a 15-year-old, an 11-year-old, and my wife, and we're around each other a lot more. We have all the same problems everybody else does. Everybody has their certain space. The internet doesn't work all the time, and it's always everybody else's fault. But I can still work. Now, if I'm on working on a CNC machine or a brake press, you don't have a brake press at home. I can't just do it at home. So I have to come in. So what we have to do is, well, why do you let all those other people stay home and not me? Because their jobs are different. And so then we have to make sure that they understand that we take it pretty seriously then to protect them. So to me, it's not about you have to do every single thing here. You have to do what makes sense to you. If you can't control people where they're going to be, then more screening and temperature taking is much more important. That's why you see manufacturers and all those folks doing it almost automatically. Whereas, let's say you're a CPA firm with 5 CPAs and 3 staff members, doing screening questions or temperature taking is probably not as necessary, but you still might say do it at home. And if you have any of the things, stay home versus, having to fill out a form or something.
I mean, I know on our front counter right now, we just had dropped off in our office digital thermometers and sanitizing pads, and it's all
Excellent.
about developing that return to work strategy for the building that we're
Hmm.
in a few weeks. So that's going to be part of the policy in this particular building. Just to kind of follow up on a question you talked about, kind of the personal travel thing. I mean, is it, if I'm an employee in any company, is it fair to assume that I show up to work on Monday morning, it's appropriate for an employer to ask, where were you this weekend? Where did
Well,
you travel? Who did you come into contact with?
yeah, that I would rephrase the question just to be, where were you at? It's open ended. So the key on these questionnaires is yes and no answers. So have you traveled outside of the state? Have you been exposed to anybody with COVID-19 or COVID-19 symptoms? Those kind of questions will answer that same question without saying, tell me exactly what you did this weekend. That's more prying. The questionnaire should be yes and no. Do you have any of these symptoms, cough, respiratory issues, etc.? Have you traveled outside of Iowa? Have you traveled outside of the United States? Have you been in contact? And all of those answers are yes or no. It doesn't require you to explain, because that's what you don't want. You don't want people to say, yeah, I traveled outside of Iowa because I had to get cancer treatment up at Mayo. That's not what I'm asking. And you have to be careful. What'd you do this weekend? Why'd you go to Minnesota? Is a very different question, and you might not know what you're asking for, and it really doesn't matter. I mean, it's fine that they went to Minnesota. We just need to know, did they? And if we have a rule about it, what's the rule and what's the obligations? And so those are things that we have to be careful about that.
You've done a good job, Mark, kind of indirectly answering, I think, a lot of these questions without stating them specifically. Here's an interesting one, just as it relates to buildings that different companies have, and thinking about the liability of a non-employee. That could be a lot of different things, coming into a building, testing positive, and in some way there's a cross contamination of that
Hmm.
back to an employee. What's the risk that
So,
we need to be
so
thinking
the answer, I
about?
mean, again, it's the same issue, and the reality is, it all stems from your OSHA general duties to provide a safe work environment. So if you're allowing people to come into your building and do whatever activity, having them either go through a questionnaire or a temperature check is perfectly fine. And it's something that is authorized. You have to follow. You have the right procedures to do it, but it's something to do, and it's important to remember, because here's the thing: people don't remember all the little things. Meaning, have you talked to your cleaning crews about what they're washing with now? Have they increased? Are they washing with with the bleach at a certain percentage high? So that, as the CDC has come out with very specific type of cleaning supplies to use, are they using that? Are they wiping down daily the doorknobs? Think about are they wiping the railings? Are they, we have cubicles in our office, and you walk by, and the tops of the cubicles are just like this little metal strip kind of thing that you could touch. But people put their hands on that and roll down that thing like all the time. Are they washing that every day? And so thinking about anybody that's coming into the office, that, what procedures are they doing? Are they wearing masks? The reality is, your building. When I go to a building and it's a manufacturing plant and I step onto the floor, as their attorney, you know what I have to do most of the time? They give me safety goggles, they give me a hard hat, they make me wear a safety vest or whatnot, just to walk through it. The same thing applies here. And so we have to think of the same kind of things. As if I'm letting them into my building, if they're working alongside it, if they might be a temp worker, same issues. We got to make sure that we're doing the proper things, and if they are, from that perspective, the issues, we need to be able to make sure to be able to protect our folks, because the reality is, it's going to come down to becoming more likely that we're going to face liability on workers' comp, because it's a known risk. I mean, it's a known risk. Everybody knows it's a risk, and there's nothing we can do right now to change that. And
Mhm.
so then the question is, if somebody gets it, and we're gonna be seeing those cases frequently.
Yeah. Mark, a question submitted. We have about 9 minutes left. We'll
Yep.
wrap this up on
Let's
time,
see.
we promise. Some people, unfortunately, we hope, very few taking advantage of maybe some of these programs, these pandemic sick leave programs. What are employers allowed to require to prove that they're indeed getting tested
Yeah.
or have tested positive for COVID.
There's very specific. So if you, and I'm not going to have the website up, there's a DOL FAQs on FFCRA where it has very specific things about what documentation you can require and what questions you can ask. So for example, if somebody is, and then secondly, there's the IRS FAQs. Both of them. The reason why is on the IRS side, if you want to get the tax credit for your FFCRA sick leave, you have to be able to have documentation to show when you pull that money out of your payroll taxes to establish that. And on there, it requires, so for example, there are 6 reasons for the FFCRA. I'll try to just deal with the ones that are the important parts. One is, first of all, they have to identify the healthcare provider and specifics required to establish that they've been ordered to stay home for 14 days. And that might be a printout from a visit. In fact, I've seen that recently. The doctor's visit summaries now actually have a specific portion down there where it has some recommendations, and it's, I quarantine for 14 days, isolate for 14 days. It's on that kind of sheet. That's a perfect one to be able to do for the first one or the second one. The third one, which is they have symptoms. You will have evidence of symptoms likely. If they're at home, then the issue is, what have they done for medical diagnosis? How are they seeking that? So information like they have an appointment, if there's an appointment card, or if there's an appointment document, that's helpful. The one that's typically that I've found is the most complicated, and it's partly because people are just, it's a hard one to deal with, is the school closure issue. And that one, frankly, there's a website that says that, but you also have to attest, and this is required in the rule, in the guidance, that you are the only one providing care for that child during the time that you're taking it. Now, again, it doesn't mean that they can't lie. They can, but they have to attest to that specifically. They also have to attest, so for example, don't forget, all of those ones only apply if they can't work remotely. So if they can work remotely, they don't get sick leave on any of those options. I mean, if they have COVID and they are one of the lucky ones to have an asymptomatic one, but they can work, they can still work and don't have to get paid time off. That is, and it's not their choice. Meaning, if they can't work, if they can work, they have to. They don't get to decide, well, I'd just rather not. The only one that's probably the more complicated one is taking care of the kids. But one of the positives about the way the law was created is they only get up to $200 a day. So depending upon how much they make, they get 2/3 of their pay up to $200. So they might not even make their full pay then. So it's not very incentivized to do that. And of that nature. So to me, there are documents out there. We have forms we've created, and things of that nature that you have to attest to all of those different things, provide the information of the healthcare provider, things of that nature, to be able to go under those forms.
Let's sneak another one in here, Mark.
Sure.
An employer has an employee that tests positive, recovers. The process for how companies should think about bringing that person back. In this particular case, they're requiring 14 days home symptom-free. Where are companies at as they think through this?
Yeah, there's a couple of options, and this is where the CDC's got a little bit, I don't want to say contradictory, but confusing, because there are some asymptomatic options. If you're asymptomatic, that you can come back in 7 days if you're symptom-free and whatnot, but it kind of goes against the idea of the 14. Again, these are all just recommendations. They're not requirements. So if you think 14 days is the most appropriate, then do 14 days. The answer really is 14 days, or when the doctor says it's okay. When does the doctor say it's okay? Now, whether you make it a minimum 14 days or, that you can decide that. And I tend to say, one of the things I've been talking to manufacturers about is be a little, lost me. All right. Sorry about that. You just lost me. I ripped out my, I was so excited about the topic. I ripped out my audio part. So I apologize for that. One of the things I've been encouraging folks to be is a little bit more aggressive in sending people home with pay. And part of the reason is that when we talked about staggered work shifts, I also almost want staggered workforces a little bit. So if I can make someone stay home for 14 days and it's not a big risk, I can go get my tax credit. They stay home for 14 days. I know they're well pretty much then. Then during that time period, if someone else does it, they go out, but then the next person comes back. It allows me to kind of do that kind of skeleton shift without putting everybody at risk then. And so part of it is, and here's the other reality of this issue. This isn't going to stop for 18 months. We are going to see up and downs. We're going to see things pop up. As I was talking to an epidemiologist a couple of weeks, and I don't know if we have school district folks here. I'm sorry if you do. As a parent, this frightens me to death. But his comment was, and he's one of the state specialists in this area. His comment was the best case scenario for schools is to start in August and close by October or November for 3 or 4 months. And I was like, oh my gosh, no, please don't. But the reality is we're going to have this kind of flow for the next 18 months. So the idea is one of the things in that planning process is what can we do and how can we live with the results? So if it's 14 days, it's 14 days. If they're still sick, it's 14 days. It's however long they're sick. But a minimum of 14 days so we can kind of plan this stuff so that we can plan for it. Because here's the thing, what's going to happen is people are going to say, well, I don't want to do this and I don't want to do that, or like, oh, I feel fine, I should come back. The dilemma is it might not be worth the risk. Yes, just stay home for 2 more days. Like, not a big deal. Stay at home. And it's also going to be creating the new norm. I know I keep using that word, even though I said I don't like it, but it's like we have to figure out another way to say it. The process by which we want to make examples of people that have shown either that they've got it or they've got symptoms and support them in that. Because frankly, I think we're going to have a lot of people ratting people out anyway. I hate, that's another good word. But the idea behind it is people are going to be telling you, and the question is they're going to be watching you as, what are you doing for my safety? I know this person's sick. This person was coughing up a lung yesterday. What'd you do about it? And we're going to have answers, and we're going to have to know those answers, and we're going to have to be okay with it in a way that we are making sure that we're consistent, that we take into consideration our business and also the employees, because the worst case scenario is a multiple positive test, because what that does is, I don't remember if everybody remembers the Sony employee data breach of a couple of years ago, where Sony, their data, a lot of people are talking about the different actors and actresses that were paid differently. But I'll tell you, the real risk is all the medical information that was potentially exposed. And I tell this story because of this. It's about trust. As an employer, as employees, we have to have trust in our employers that they're going to keep us in a safe place, a safe working environment, not put us into a place where we could get hurt, where I can't go home to my family, where I suffer health problems or anything like that. And with COVID, we don't know a lot of the answers right now, so we have to be as communicate them to them as much as possible to help engage in building trust that we're relying on appropriate information, and that once it adapts, we will adapt too. Because if you just say, oh, we got this, it's perfect, we're good, come on back tomorrow, next Monday you're in, and then I come back in and I get COVID and I get a serious have serious lung problems for the rest of my life, that is devastating from a trust perspective for the employer, for all the other employees too. So we have to ponder and make sure that we're having a communication and creating the right expectation level and engage in those conversations for any of those conversations. That's why it's really important, this topic, to have it set up and have thought through those processes before it happens.
Mark, we really appreciate your time. Our hour's up. We didn't necessarily promise everyone that we'd go through this hour and you'd all feel good at the end, but hopefully we equipped you with just some knowledge and an approach to help you think through and help you think about the topics that you need to think through. So thank you, Mark. We really appreciate your time. Thanks to all of you joining us. We will record this. It will be posted to our COVID-19 resource page. So be sure to check that out in the next day or so. Stay connected with our webpage. That way, we're continuing to bring you what we believe to be the most relevant resources and information as you keep working to move business forward. So, Mark, thanks again. We
Thanks,
appreciate
Nick.
it.
Thanks for coming.
All
Appreciate
right.
it. Stay safe, everybody.
Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.